In the
Look at her
frozen
face,
silence
she's
of an
scared.
Alaska winter,
Don't
they
touch
shoved
me.
the wheelchair
Have a
and
nice
sent the
fall.
disabled young woman crashing into the snow. Elena lay curled on the icy ground, her hands trembling as she reached for her overturned chair, while three wealthy young men stood above her, laughing as if her pain were nothing more than entertainment. They believed their family name would shield them from every consequence, that no one in this small town would ever dare to stand up for a vulnerable girl. But they were wrong, because at the far end of that snow-covered street, a U.S. veteran was walking toward them, and beside him was Rex, the loyal German shepherd who once saved his life on the battlefield. Today, they would become the shield for someone who could not stand on her own. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this opening touches your heart, leave a message for Elena. The winter storms of Copper Ridge, Alaska, were notoriously brutal. Wind that cut like razors, snow that swallowed sound, and a gray sky that felt heavy enough to collapse onto the earth below. By late afternoon, the town had become a ghostly watercolor of white and shadow, with swirling snow erasing footprints seconds after they were made. Copper Ridge was small, remote, wrapped in log cabins, metal rooftops, and the constant hum of survival. It was a place where people worked with their heads down and their hearts guarded against the cold. And into this frozen world walked a man who had known far harsher battles than any winter storm. Jim Walker, an American veteran in his early 50s, carrying a past he rarely spoke of. Jim moved with the steady, grounded posture of someone who had spent half his life with a rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was carved with the sharp angles of endurance, the kind earned after decades in the Marines. Strong jawline peppered with gray stubble, deep-set eyes the color of cold steel, and skin weathered by sun, sand, and time. His parka, military cold weather issue, hung heavy on his broad shoulders, the high collar dusted with ice. Beside him trotted Rex, his 5-year-old German shepherd, a large, powerful dog with a black and tan coat thick enough to fight the bitter air. Rex walked with calm precision, scanning the street with the alertness of a companion trained in danger, not comfort. The storm pushed against them as they made their way down Main Street, past shuttered shops and glowing lampposts haloed by drifting snow. Jim's breath rose in short fog clouds, each one fading quickly into the wind. Copper Ridge had been just a name on a map, a place as far away from war as he could imagine. After years spent in conflicts where the ground shook beneath him, he longed for silence. The kind of silence that wasn't born of fear, but of peace. Most importantly, he needed Rex to rest, too. The dog had once saved his life in Afghanistan, when an ambush had pinned Jim down. Rex had taken shrapnel to his flank, and the scar that remained was a quiet reminder of loyalty, deeper than words. When the wind became too harsh to bear, Jim spotted a warm glow ahead. The Copper Rim Diner. Its windows were foggy from the heat inside, and a neon open sign flickered in soft blue. He pushed open the door, and a welcome wave of warmth wrapped around both him and Rex. The smell of coffee, butter, and grilled potatoes was a comforting blanket in itself. A few locals sat inside, loggers with thick beards and heavy coats, a pair of elderly women sharing soup, and a young cook behind the counter humming to an old country song. They all glanced up as Jim entered, the way small towns always did when a stranger walked in. Not with suspicion, but with a cautious curiosity. Rex padded to Jim's side and sat obediently near his boots, his tail brushing lightly against the wooden floor. Snow still clung to his fur, melting slowly in tiny droplets. Jim gave him a quick scratch behind the ear before choosing a booth near the window. From there, he could watch the swirling white outside, the storm painting the world into silence. The waitress approached. a woman in her late 30s named Mara, with a neat ponytail, kind eyes, and the brisk efficiency of someone who had spent her life working through long winters. She looked Jim over with a practiced understanding. "You look like you've been walking through the devil's own freezer," she said, smiling softly. Jim's voice was low, steady, a little rough from the cold. "Feels like it. Coffee, please. And a bowl of whatever's hot." Mara nodded, glancing down at Rex with admiration. "Beautiful dog. Haven't seen one trained like that around here." Jim offered a rare half-smile. "He's saved my life more than once. We go everywhere together." Mara didn't pry further. Another thing Jim appreciated. People in Alaska understood boundaries. The cold taught that lesson quickly. She left him with steaming coffee that immediately thawed the stiffness in his fingers. Outside the diner window, life moved in small fragments. A couple struggled against the wind as they crossed the street, their coats flapping like wings. A mailbox creaked on its hinge. A single pickup truck rumbled by, its headlights smearing through falling snow. The storm made everything appear softer, muted, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Jim found a strange comfort in watching it all. For once there was nothing demanding his attention. No explosions, no shouting, no chaotic decisions between life and death. Just weather, harsh but predictable, the kind of enemy a man could see coming. As he ate, a local radio station droned quietly from behind the counter, playing a mix of country classics and community announcements. Jim listened absently, catching mentions of school closures, an upcoming fishing tournament, and warnings about the incoming cold front. Copper Ridge, though small, seemed alive in its own humble way. He could imagine living here, fixing up an old cabin, taking Rex on long walks, letting the quiet rebuild the parts of himself he had locked away during the war. The thought was surprisingly soothing. Mara returned with a pot of coffee and refilled his cup without asking. "You passing through?" she asked gently, "or looking for something more permanent?" Jim met her gaze. Her tone wasn't intrusive, just a small-town warm curiosity. "Not sure yet," he replied. "Trying to figure that out?" Through the window he could see the lights of the town flickering through the storm. Copper Ridge had a way of softening even the most guarded heart. He didn't know it yet, but this place would soon test him in a way he hadn't expected. Rex suddenly perked up, ears lifting, head turning toward the window. Jim followed his gaze. Outside, shapes moved through the snow, blurred by wind and distance. Nothing threatening, just two people hurrying under a shared umbrella. But Jim trusted Rex's instincts. When the dog became alert, it meant something in the environment was worth noticing. Jim placed a steady hand on Rex's shoulder. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Rex relaxed but kept watching the window. Jim finished his meal and leaned back, letting warmth soak into his bones. The diner had grown quieter, with only a few patrons left. Copper Ridge after dark became a quieter creature still. He watched the snow fall in thick, spiraling curtains and felt the first fragile thread of peace begin to weave its way through his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this winter town could be the place where he learned how to breathe again. A place that didn't ask him to be a soldier. A place that allowed him to be simply a man with his dog, searching for something like redemption. He didn't know that tomorrow, fate would place him at a crossroads he could not ignore. He didn't know that a young disabled woman would soon need his help. And he didn't know that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm he would soon walk into. But on this first night, as the wind howled through Copper Ridge, Jim Walker allowed himself a moment of rare stillness, just a man and his dog, sheltered from the cold. The storm had worsened overnight, leaving Copper Ridge buried beneath a fresh blanket of snow so thick it muffled all sound. By early morning, the town's streets were still half empty, most people choosing warmth over the cruel bite of the January wind. Jim Walker stepped out of the diner after breakfast, pulling the high collar of his military cold-weather parka closer to his jaw. Rex, the 5-year-old German shepherd with alert amber eyes and frost forming on his black and tan coat, trotted beside him, ears twitching at every distant noise. Jim intended to walk a simple loop around Main Street, but fate had other plans. Through the blowing snow, he spotted movement near the old pharmacy, 3 figures surrounding a 4th, smaller one trapped in a wheelchair. As he moved closer, the shapes sharpened through the veil of snowfall. Elena Parker, a 22-year-old woman with long, dark brown hair tied loosely under a knit beanie, sat in her wheelchair, looking small against the vast white world around her. Her skin was pale against the cold, cheeks flushed pink from the freezing wind. Her legs were wrapped in a wool blanket tucked neatly under the straps attached to her chair. Elena's posture was tense, her gloved hands gripping her wheels tightly. The anxiety in her wide hazel eyes was unmistakable. She was facing 3 men. Trent Keller, 25, tall, broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the smug confidence of inherited money. And his 2 friends, Logan Hart, 24, a shorter man with a stocky frame, sharp nose, and restless, darting eyes, and Mason Reed, 25, lanky, dark-haired, wearing a designer parka that hardly matched the town's ruggedness. Trent Keller laughed loudly, the sound cutting through the cold air like a serrated blade. His breath plumed white in front of his grin, a grin far too wide to be anything but cruel. He leaned over Elena, tapping the top of her wheelchair with a gloved finger, as if it were an object rather than an extension of her body. "Come on, Elena Parker," Trent taunted, his voice laced with entitlement. "You can't just park in the middle of the walkway, or do you enjoy having people wait on you?" Logan Hart chuckled and nudged Mason Reed, who crossed his arms with a smirk, watching the scene like it was some kind of winter entertainment. Elena tried to maneuver backward, but Logan stepped behind the chair, blocking her escape. The wind picked up, whipping Elena's hair into her face. She pushed it back with trembling fingers, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please move," Elena said, her tone firm yet strained. "I need to get to the community center." Trent Keller crouched down slightly, getting closer than comfort allowed, inspecting her as though she were an object rather than a person. "Or what?" Trent asked mockingly. "Going to run us over?" His breath smelled faintly of expensive bourbon even at this early hour. Elena's jaw tightened. Her injury from college, a spinal damage accident caused by a drunk driver, had taken her mobility, but not her pride. Even so, the helplessness of the moment pressed hard on her chest. Jim Walker stepped to the edge of the scene, stopping just before announcing his presence. Rex lowered into a slow, watchful stance beside him. Jim had seen enough bullying in his lifetime to recognize danger before it escalated. He observed Trent Keller's posture, the slight forward lean, the lifted chin, the predatory amusement. He recognized it instantly because he had seen that look among soldiers who had lost their moral compass overseas. As a Marine, Jim had learned never to escalate unless necessary, but he also knew when stepping in was unavoidable. The tension in Rex's muscles mirrored his own. Trent Keller placed his hand on the wheel of Elena's chair and spun it slightly, forcing her body to twist with the movement. It was not violent, but humiliating. Mason Reed laughed at the sight, adjusting his designer scarf, while Logan Hart continued blocking her path with an exaggerated shrug. "Just having fun," Trent said, glancing back at his friends. Snowflakes collected in his blonde hair like glittering shards. "Besides, She's always rolling around acting like she owns the sidewalks. Maybe we're just teaching her some manners." Elena's breath trembled, not from fear alone, but from the familiar helpless anger she had carried for years. Jim stepped forward finally, snow crunching under his boots. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of discipline and years of command. Trent twisted around, his smirk fading slightly as he took in Jim Walker's imposing frame. Tall, built like a seasoned fighter, graying stubble marking his jaw, parka heavy and utilitarian. Rex stood beside him, tail down, ears forward, ready to react. Trent blinked in annoyance, though beneath it, a flicker of caution sparked in his eyes. "And who are you supposed to be?" Trent sneered, though the bravado was thin. Jim didn't rise to the bait. His steel-gray eyes stayed fixed on Trent Keller, with the calm of a man who had seen real violence and no longer feared small-town bullies. "Move away from her," Jim said simply. Rex let out a low rumble, a sound of warning rather than aggression. Logan Hart swallowed hard. Mason Reed took a half step back, glancing between Jim and Rex. Trent tried to recover his ego, stepping toward Jim with hands spread arrogantly. "Relax, we're not hurting anyone," Trent said. "Just talking." But Jim had seen the trembling in Elena's hands. He had seen the way her breathing hitched. Then Trent Keller made a mistake. He placed both hands on the back of Elena's wheelchair and pushed hard. The chair rolled backward over the icy street edge. Elena's arms flew out instinctively, but the wheels slid on the ice. The wheelchair tipped violently to the right, crashing onto its side. Elena's body hit the frozen, ground with a muffled cry, snow spraying around her. The blanket slipped off her legs, the metal frame of the chair clattering sharply. The sound echoed across the empty street like a gunshot. Rex barked instantly, loud and sharp, fur bristling along his spine. Jim's reaction was immediate. He stepped in front of the fallen Elena as Trent instinctively backed up, the freezing wind tugging at his expensive coat. "You crossed a line," Jim said, each word calm but carved from iron. Elena lay on the ground, propped on one elbow, wincing from the impact. Her beanie had fallen crooked, revealing more of her dark hair pressed with snow. Jim knelt beside her, his gloved hands gentle as he checked for injuries. Elena's breath fogged unevenly, but she nodded shakily. "I'm okay," Elena whispered, though the strain in her voice made it clear she wasn't. Logan Hart muttered something unintelligible, and Mason Reed shifted nervously, suddenly looking like a boy who'd gone too far. Trent Keller's expression wavered between anger and fear. He wasn't used to being challenged, and Jim's quiet authority unsettled him more than outright aggression would have. "She fell," Trent said defensively. "Sidewalk's icy. Not my fault." Jim stood slowly, rising to his full height. "Leave," Jim ordered, voice low but absolute. Rex stepped forward beside Jim, a living wall of muscle and loyalty. Trent hesitated, just for a moment, before tossing his chin upward in false confidence. "Whatever," he muttered, signaling his friends. Logan Hart hurried away first. Mason Reed followed. Trent Keller lingered for a second, glaring at Jim as though memorizing his face. Then he turned and disappeared into the swirling snow. When they were finally gone, Jim knelt again beside Elena. "Let's get you upright," Jim said. Rex sat close, lowering his head to sniff Elena's hand gently. Jim lifted the wheelchair with practiced ease and checked its frame before helping Elena back into the seat. His movements were steady, patient, ensuring she felt safe rather than rushed. Elena looked up at Jim, her hazel eyes filled with a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, voice catching from the cold and the shock. Jim nodded once, his breath streaming in warm clouds into the air. "You're not alone out here," Jim said quietly, the storm swirling behind them like a living thing. The wind rushed through Copper Ridge with a colder bite than the night before, turning falling snow into horizontal sheets of white that stung against exposed skin. Jim Walker stood in the middle of Main Street, his military cold-weather parka stiffened by frost, his breath falling in slow, controlled plumes. Rex pressed close to his leg, the German shepherd's thick black and tan coat bristling with tension. Elena's overturned wheelchair lay only a few feet away, its metal frame dotted with sharp crystals of ice. Jim's jaw tightened as he took in the sight. Elena Parker trembling, cheeks flushed from cold and shock, her hazel eyes wide and glassy. The three young men who had pushed her to the ground now stared back at him, suddenly unsure of themselves before a man who had survived things they couldn't imagine. Rex growled low, a deep rumble that vibrated through the frozen air, making Trent Keller tense involuntarily. The German shepherd lowered into a defensive posture, ears pinned forward, tail rigid behind him. Jim placed a subtle hand near Rex's shoulder, not to stop him, but to steady their stance as a unified front. Jim's steel-gray eyes locked on Trent's wind-reddened face. "Step back," Jim said, calm and precise, without raising his voice. His tone alone carried the weight of a man who had issued commands under fire. Snow swirled around him like smoke from a battlefield, and for a brief second, Trent Keller saw not a stranger, but someone dangerous, someone who didn't bluff. Trent clenched his jaw, trying to recover his arrogance. The 25-year-old stood tall, expensive parka zipped halfway up, blonde hair caught by the wind. His friends hovered behind him, Logan Hart, stocky with a nervous twitch in his eyes, and Mason Reed, lanky and pale beneath the flickering streetlight. "Relax," Trent said, voice thin despite his attempt to sound bold. "We weren't going to hurt her." But Jim stepped forward, boots crunching heavily into the snow. "You already did," he replied, "and you're about 2 seconds from making your mistake even bigger." Rex gave another warning growl, the fur along his spine rising. Logan swallowed visibly. Mason drifted a half step away, suddenly preferring not to be too close to Trent. Elena Parker struggled to push herself upright on the icy ground. Her long dark hair had come loose from her beanie, strands clinging to her damp cheeks. She winced from the impact of the fall, but her pride hurt even more. Jim knelt beside her, helping her sit upright against the snowy curb with slow, steady motions. "You're all right," Jim said quietly. "We've got you." Rex sniffed her hand with gentle recognition, softening for only a moment before turning his glare back toward Trent's group. Elena nodded shakily, brushing snow off her wool blanket. "Thank you," she breathed, voice small but sincere. Her hazel eyes flicked toward the three men, then back to Jim, silently asking him not to escalate further. Jim rose again, placing himself fully between Elena and her tormentors. He squared his broad shoulders and lifted his chin slightly, a subtle signal of dominance drilled into him during decades in the Marines. "Walk away," Jim told them. It was not a request. The storm whipped harder, wind howling down the street as if punctuating his words. Trent looked around, at the empty sidewalks, at the swirling snow, at Logan's pale, anxious face, and at Mason's fidgeting hands. Something in Trent's expression flickered. Annoyance tightened his features, but fear lived behind his eyes. For a moment, Trent Keller tried to pretend he still held control. He stepped forward, close enough that Rex barked once, sharp and explosive in the winter air. Trent flinched. Jim didn't move, didn't blink. He looked down at Trent with that same calm intensity that had unsettled countless men in far worse places. "You don't want this," Jim said quietly. "Not today." Rex stood beside him like a living shadow, muscles taut and ready. Trent inhaled sharply through his nose, his shoulders rising with forced bravado. "Whatever," he snapped finally, throwing a glance toward his friends. "Let's get out of here." Logan Hart was the first to turn away, pulling his coat tighter, as though the cold had suddenly become unbearable. Mason Reed followed quickly, hands shoved deep into his pockets, avoiding eye contact with both Elena and Jim. Trent lingered a moment longer, the swirling snow framing him like a ghost of the arrogance he once held. He narrowed his eyes at Jim, committing the older man's face to memory, a face he would surely resent. "This isn't over," Trent muttered, though his voice cracked slightly. Then he pivoted on his heel and strode after his friends, disappearing into the white curtain of the storm. When the last of the three men vanished from sight, the street fell silent except for the wind. Jim allowed his shoulders to drop slightly as the tension eased. Rex shook snow from his coat but remained alert, glancing constantly in the direction the bullies had gone. Jim turned back to Elena, kneeling once more beside her. "Let's get you upright," he said. Elena nodded again, lifting her trembling hands. Together they righted her wheelchair, Jim gripping the metal frame with practiced strength, checking each wheel to ensure nothing had bent. Snow clung to his gloves as he brushed the seat off with gentle precision. Rex stood close, eyes soft now as he leaned his head against Elena's leg in reassurance. Elena settled back into her chair slowly, her breath visible in quick, shallow puffs. "I'm sorry you had to step in," she murmured, her voice threaded with embarrassment. "They usually don't go that far." Jim shook his head. "Don't apologize for someone else's cruelty." He adjusted the blanket across her lap and tightened the strap that kept her legs secure. "Your safety matters, that's all." Elena watched him with a mixture of gratitude and lingering shock, noticing the deep lines etched near his eyes, lines formed not by age alone, but by years of war, hardship, and leadership. Rex nudged Jim gently, signaling the continued presence of danger. Jim gave the dog a brief nod before standing fully upright. The storm showed no signs of calming, and the icy road was no place to linger. "Where were you headed?" Jim asked. Elena hesitated, hugging the edges of her coat tighter. "The community center," she said. "I volunteer there in the mornings. They have ramps, equipment. It gives me something to do, something that feels useful." Her words carried a vulnerability she hadn't intended to reveal. Jim nodded thoughtfully. "We'll get you there." With Rex walking on her right side and Jim guiding the wheelchair from behind, the three of them moved through the snow towards the glowing warmth of the community center ahead. For the first time that morning, Elena felt protected, not because she couldn't defend herself, but because someone chose to stand with her. And as the storm howled across Copper Ridge, Jim Walker realized he had found something unexpected as well. Purpose in a place he had only meant to pass through. The storm outside had thickened into a wall of white by the time Jim Walker pushed the diner door open, guiding Elena Parker inside. Warm air rolled over them, thick with the scents of coffee, butter, and grilled bacon, contrasting sharply with the icy bite of Alaska's winter. The few customers inside looked up, their expressions shifting as they saw Elena's snow-dusted hair, her wheelchair scratched from the fall, and Jim's towering frame in his military cold-weather parka, its high collar stiff with frost. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with auburn curls named Nora Benson, hurried toward them. Nora was short, with soft cheeks and perpetually tired eyes, but kindness radiated from her posture. She led them to a booth near the heater without a single unnecessary question. Jim settled beside the window, Rex resting at his boots, while Elena adjusted her gloves with trembling hands. She still hadn't found her voice since the confrontation outside, but the quiet safety of the diner felt like a blanket gently draped around her. Elena finally exhaled, a long, shaky breath that fogged slightly in the air. She brushed her chestnut brown hair back behind her ear, revealing delicate features and pale skin flushed red from the cold. She looked younger than her 22 years, but her eyes carried a depth that only those who had endured hardship possessed. Rex lifted his head, sniffed her carefully, and nudged her hand as if reassuring her. She managed a faint smile. "Thank you, both of you," she murmured. Her voice was soft, breathy, but each word carried sincerity. Jim nodded once, his expression unreadable beneath the rugged lines carved into his face by war and winters alike. He had seen many things in life. Too many. But cruelty toward the defenseless was something he never grew desensitized to, especially not tonight. Nora brought them warm drinks, her eyes lingering on the bruise forming on Elena's shoulder. "Sweetheart, whatever happened out there, you're safe here," she said. Elena swallowed hard. For a moment she looked like she wanted to disappear. After a long silence, Elena finally spoke again. "This isn't the first time," she admitted, her fingers gripping the coffee cup with white knuckles. "They've been doing this for months. Trent Keller and his friends." Jim studied her face, noting the hesitation, the embarrassment that shadowed her features. Elena stared out the frosted window, watching the swirling snow as if it might swallow the memory. "I moved to Copper Ridge 6 months ago," she continued, "after my spinal injury." Her tone remained calm, but her eyes flickered with something deeper. Pain, perhaps, or resilience forged under pressure. She explained how a skiing accident during her university years left her paralyzed from the waist down. No family with influence, no money like Trent's. She came here for a quiet restart, working remotely as a freelance designer while pursuing her love for painting. But a girl in a wheelchair alone in a small Alaskan town became an easy target for boys drunk on privilege and boredom. Jim listened carefully, hands folded in front of him, the faint scar above his eyebrow tightening whenever Elena mentioned abuse. Trent pushing her wheelchair into snowbanks, his friends mocking her paralysis, shaving cream sprayed over her sketches during a charity fair, switching the brake locks on her wheelchair when she wasn't looking. "And nobody stepped in?" Jim finally asked, his voice low, gravelly. Elena let out a humorless laugh. "People here avoid trouble. Trent's father owns half the businesses in town, and I never wanted to make things worse. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd eventually stop." Jim exchanged a knowing glance with Rex, who remained tense and alert at his feet. Jim Walker had spent half a lifetime recognizing patterns of oppression. Bullies didn't stop, not without someone drawing a line. Nora returned with their food, hot soup and warm cornbread, and paused beside Elena, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Honey, you don't deserve any of that." Her voice held an edge of maternal outrage. Elena's eyes shimmered, though she fought to keep emotion from spilling out. "I'm not helpless," Elena whispered. "I just didn't want to be seen as fragile. I hate that I even need this chair." She tapped the wheel lightly. Jim leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Needing something doesn't make you weak," he said. "Surviving does, and you've done a hell of a lot of surviving." His tone was steady, not comforting, because comfort was not what Elena needed. She needed truth, and strength recognized strength. For the first time that night, Elena met his gaze fully, Her dark eyes were glassy but fierce, the kind of look Jim had seen on soldiers who refused to give in no matter how battered they were. "You think I'm strong?" she asked. Jim didn't hesitate. "I know you are." Rex punctuated the statement by resting his head against her leg, earning a soft laugh from her. The sound was delicate but real. The storm continued to batter the windows, but inside the diner, something shifted, like a candle being lit in a long, darkened room. Elena straightened her posture slightly, though her body still trembled from adrenaline. "I want to report them," she said quietly. "Not tonight, but soon. I'm tired of pretending I don't matter." Nora blinked in surprise, then nodded approvingly. "Good. And you'll have witnesses this time." Her eyes flicked toward Jim with a mixture of recognition and respect. Jim wasn't a man who invited conversation about his past, but his posture, scars, and aura made certain things clear. A veteran. Someone who had carried burdens heavier than words. Jim tapped a finger against the table thoughtfully. "Reporting them might be one step," he said. "But Trent won't stop easily. People like him escalate when they feel cornered." Elena stiffened, anxiety creeping into her expression again. Jim saw it immediately and softened his tone. "But you won't be alone in this. Not anymore." The diner's bell jingled as a gust of wind forced its way inside, and a tall, scruffy man entered. Tom Vickers, the town mechanic. With his grease-stained jacket, unshaven jaw, and broad shoulders, he looked intimidating, but Jim had learned that looks often deceived. Tom approached their table cautiously. "Saw what happened out there," he muttered. He wasn't much older than Trent, maybe late 20s, with shaggy blonde hair and a nervous habit of rubbing the back of his neck. "Trent's been trouble for a long time. Sorry no one stepped in sooner." Elena offered him a faint smile. "It's okay. You're here now." Tom nodded, cheeks reddening slightly. "If you need help, I'll speak up, even if the Kellers don't like it." As the storm roared louder outside, Jim felt something settle inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't expected to find in this remote Alaskan town. He'd come to Copper Ridge searching for quiet, for distance from battles he'd fought both on foreign soil and in his own mind. But life rarely offered stillness to men like him. Sometimes, instead, it offered a moment where stepping forward was the only choice that made sense. "Elena," he said gently, "they targeted you because they thought you had no one. That changes now." Her throat tightened, tears rising despite her effort to suppress them. But these weren't tears of fear. They were the kind born when someone finally feels seen. By the time their meals were finished, Elena's hands had steadied, and some color had returned to her cheeks. She told Jim more about her art, her passion for capturing landscapes, her dream of hosting a gallery show someday. She spoke with quiet fire, the kind that revealed her true identity beneath the hardship. Someone who refused to surrender her voice even when the world tried to silence her. Jim listened intently, feeling a rare warmth unfold within him. Elena wasn't fragile. She was formidable, just not in ways she realized yet. And he knew, without needing to say it, that Rex sensed it too. The dog lay close to her, protective and calm, acknowledging a bond forming between them. When the storm eased slightly, Jim helped Elena secure her coat and gloves. Nora insisted on packing extra cornbread for the road, and Tom offered to walk them to Elena's apartment, but Jim politely declined. "We've got it," he said, his voice carrying a finality that needed no explanation. Outside, the icy wind cut through the streets once more, but Elena no longer shivered from fear. Jim walked beside her wheelchair, Rex trotting at her side, their footsteps carving a steady path through the snow. And though none of them spoke, there was an unspoken understanding. tonight wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight Elena would no longer face alone. Jim Walker woke before sunrise, long before the first hints of light bled through the storm-clouded Alaskan sky. The wind outside his cabin rattled the windows, a reminder that the blizzard from the previous night still tangled through Copper Ridge like a restless spirit. Rex lay curled near the wood stove, his black and tan coat glowing orange under the flames. Jim moved quietly, slipping into his military cold-weather parka with its high collar and double zipper, the thick wind-proof fabric creasing as if molded to his frame. He had a purpose this morning, a reason that chased away the quiet he usually lived for. Elena Parker needed protection, and Trent Keller needed to face something he had never faced before: consequences. Jim checked the small USB drive in his pocket, a drive that now contained several pieces of footage from cameras around Main Street. It was time to bring it to Sheriff Boone. Main Street looked ghostly as Jim walked toward the sheriff's office. Snow clung to the power lines like cotton, and the street lamps cast long amber streaks over unplowed roads. Inside the station, Sheriff Mitch Boone looked as though he'd been awake all night. Boone was a broad man in his 50s, with a heavy jawline dusted with gray stubble and dark circles under his eyes. His uniform was wrinkled, and his thick hands were wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee. Boone was not a corrupt lawman, but years of dealing with the Keller family had carved exhaustion into his posture. Still, his dark blue eyes held a steady spark of determination. Jim knocked once and entered. Without preamble, he set the USB drive on Boone's desk. Camera footage from the diner alley, and a few angles from the street, shows Trent and his boys pushing Elena's wheelchair into the snowbank, Jim said. Boone blinked, stunned. Footage? I've been trying to get something for months. Boone plugged the drive into his computer, and the grainy videos began to play. Jim stood silently, arms crossed over his parka, Rex sitting at attention beside him. On the screen, the three men, Trent Keller, tall and athletic with coiffed blonde hair and the smugness of inherited power, Carter Hale, lanky and restless with a twitchy jaw, and Devin Moss, broad-shouldered with a thick neck and a poorly concealed mean streak, appeared clearly. The footage caught Trent laughing as he shoved Elena's wheelchair. It froze Boone in place, his jaw clenched until the muscles pulsed. I knew it, he growled. I knew that boy was trouble, but this is enough to act. Boone straightened, setting his mug aside. Walker, you might have just given me the leverage I needed. Jim watched Boone make calls, his tone shifting from weary resignation to sharp command. Boone wasn't a man easily intimidated, but the Kellers wielded influence like a weapon. For the first time in years, the sheriff felt like he had a fighting chance. After a few minutes, Boone leaned back in his chair. I'll open an official investigation. I'll bring Trent in for questioning. But, Walker, you know how this town works. The Kellers won't let this go quietly. Jim nodded slowly. He wasn't naive. He had served too long in too many places where power shielded the wrong people. That's why I'm telling you now, he said. Trent won't come after me. He'll go after her. Boone's expression darkened. We'll keep an eye out. But I can't put an officer on Elena without solid charges. Jim accepted the truth, though a hard knot formed in his chest. Rex growled softly, sensing the tension. Meanwhile, across town, Trent Keller slammed his bedroom door hard enough to rattle the frame. His room was a chaotic mixture of expensive gym equipment, designer jackets, and the smell of cologne sharp enough to sting the air. Trent was 25, tall with sharp cheekbones and a permanent smirk twisted into rage. His fists clenched as he read the message on his phone. Sheriff Boone has footage. You need to come in. Trent's eyes flared with fury. That washed-up veteran thinks he can humiliate me? He spat at his reflection in the mirror, where his stormy blue eyes stared back. And that cripple thinks she can run to him for protection? His worldview had never allowed the possibility of being held accountable. Privilege had shaped him into something dangerous, entitled, volatile, and desperate to maintain the illusion of power. He stormed downstairs to the Keller Mansion's private gym, where Carter Hale and Devin Moss were lifting weights. Carter, 24, with narrow shoulders and jittery energy, looked up nervously when he saw Trent's expression. Devin, 25, with a wrestler's build and a shaved head, paused mid-rep. "What's wrong now?" Devin muttered. Trent tossed his phone onto the floor. "Walker went to the sheriff. He's trying to ruin me. That little charity case is ruining everything." Carter swallowed hard. Maybe we should just lay low for a while." Trent stepped forward and shoved Carter against the wall so fast that the weights rattled. "Lay low? You think I'm scared of some old soldier? This is my town. My father owns half the damn county." Devin shifted uneasily, wiping sweat from his brow. "What do you want to do?" Trent's smile was twisted and cold. "Elena thinks she can hide behind him. We'll show her she can't." Back in town, Jim walked Elena home after visiting the grocery store, the wind whipping around them but the snow easing. Elena wore a brown winter coat with a thick scarf, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Her dark hair was tucked behind her ears, and though her movements were calm, her eyes carried worry. "Do you think Sheriff Boone can actually do something?" she asked quietly. Jim walked beside her, one hand steadying her wheelchair through patches of snow. "He's got evidence now. Real evidence. But Trent won't take it lightly," Jim said. Elena's fingers tightened on her wheel rims. "I hate that he can still decide how afraid I am," she whispered. Jim slowed his steps. "He only decides that if you let him." Elena looked up at him, searching for strength in the rugged lines of his face. And she found it. As they reached her apartment building, a modest wooden structure with peeling paint and a slanted porch, Tom Vickers stepped outside, carrying tools in a metal toolbox. Tom, the town's mechanic, wore a heavy work jacket stained with oil, and his blonde hair stuck out from beneath a beanie. He was shy but sincere, and he gave Elena a quiet nod. "I checked your ramp this morning," he said, gesturing to the metal platform leading up to her door. "Just making sure it wasn't damaged when those jerks pushed you." Elena gave him a grateful smile. "Thank you, Tom." Jim recognized the bashful warmth in Tom's expression. This was a man who wished he could have stepped in earlier. "Appreciate you looking out for her," Jim said. Tom nodded. "Someone's gotta." Inside, Elena settled into her small living room. Her apartment was filled with sketches, warm lamplight, and soft blues and grays that reflected her artistic spirit. Jim stood near the window, watching the street below. Rex sat beside him, ears alert. Elena rolled closer. "You think he'll come after me tonight?" she asked. Jim considered the question. "Maybe not tonight, but soon." His voice was steady, but Elena saw the shadows of past battles in his eyes. "Why are you helping me this much?" she whispered. Jim turned to her slowly. "Because no one helped me when I needed it most, and because you deserve better than fear." Tears gathered at the edge of her lashes, but she blinked them away, not wanting pity. Sheriff Boone spent the evening reviewing the footage and gathering statements. He contacted the county attorney, prepared preliminary arrest reports, and even confronted the Keller patriarch, Samuel Keller, a stern man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and an expression carved from granite. Samuel tried to dismiss Boone as overreacting, but Boone stood firm. "Your son crossed the line," he said. This time I've got proof. Samuel's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake. Boone held his ground. The only mistake I made was waiting this long. But as Boone walked back to his office, a sinking feeling crept into his gut. He knew the Kellers wouldn't accept defeat quietly. That evening, Trent paced his bedroom like a caged wolf. Rage simmered in every step, every breath. He imagined Elena's expression when he pushed her wheelchair, imagined the moment she fell. It didn't satisfy him anymore. Now he wanted something that would terrify her into silence. He grabbed his coat, a sleek black parka lined with fur. Tonight, he whispered to Carter and Devon, we're taking everything from her. She'll wish she'd never crossed me. Carter hesitated. Jim Walker will be there. Trent's eyes burned. Then we do it when he's gone. A plan formed quickly, viciously. He would strike where she felt safest, and he would make sure she knew this wasn't a warning. This was domination. Jim returned home that night with Rex by his side, but his chest felt tight. Something in the air was wrong. The wind, the silence, the way the streetlights flickered. The instincts he had honed through years of combat told him trouble was coming. He sat beside Rex, rubbing the dog's neck as the fire crackled. Stay ready, he murmured. Rex lifted his head, ears tilting as if he, too, sensed the shift. Jim closed his eyes, letting the warmth wash over him. But he knew the peace wouldn't last. Trent Keller was a wounded animal now, dangerous and unpredictable, and Elena Parker was his target. Jim opened his eyes with a steely focus. If he comes for her, he whispered, he'll find me instead. The blizzard that had threatened Copper Ridge all week finally descended in full force the next morning. Snow whipped across the streets like sheets of white fire, obscuring buildings and turning the town into a swirling maze. Elena Parker maneuvered her wheelchair carefully across the hospital staff entrance, her brown winter coat zipped to her chin, her dark chestnut hair tied into a low ponytail under a knit beanie. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her breath fogged in the air. She had an early appointment, one she couldn't miss, and despite the storm, she carried herself with a quiet determination. The storm might have been fierce, but she was fiercer. Today, especially. She refused to keep living in fear of Trent Keller. Trent stood near the employee parking zone, his black parka slick with snow and his blonde hair plastered to his forehead. His blue eyes burned with a toxic mixture of ego and desperation. Carter Hale and Devon Moss flanked him, though both men appeared far less certain than the night before. Trent's jaw ticked as he watched Elena approach, a smirk curling across his lips. "Look who decided to show up," he called out, stepping forward. Carter shifted uncomfortably, his narrow shoulders hunched, while Devon's bulky frame seemed tense, frost gathering on his beard stubble. Elena slowed, but didn't stop. Her fingers tightened on her wheel rims, her breath steadying. "Leave me alone, Trent," she said firmly, meeting his gaze with a steadiness he didn't expect. The words froze Trent mid-step. He was used to Elena shrinking back, keeping her eyes down, pretending not to hear him. But now she faced him head-on, her dark eyes unflinching. "Excuse me?" Trent scoffed, stepping closer, his boots crunching loudly in the snow. Elena didn't blink. "Leave me alone." Her voice didn't tremble. For the first time, Trent hesitated. Not because he felt guilt, but because he wasn't accustomed to resistance. Carter looked at Devon nervously. "Trent, maybe we should just go." But Trent shoved him aside. "Shut up," he snapped. He leaned down toward Elena, looming, trying to regain control. "Who do you think you're talking to?" he hissed. "Someone who finally knows her worth," she replied. Just then, a shape emerged through the storm. broad, steady, unmistakably resolute. Jim Walker stepped out of the curtain of snow like an iron statue carved from the blizzard itself. His military cold-weather parka was coated in frost, high collar protecting his rugged jawline. His gray eyes were focused, cold, tired of bullies. And at his side, Rex bounded through the snow, the German shepherd's ears perked, and his gaze locked onto Trent with predatory alertness. The transformation in Trent's face was almost instantaneous. Rage flickered into unease, unease into fear, fear into cornered arrogance. "What do you want, old man?" Trent barked, masking his trembling. Jim didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Step back from her," he said evenly, planting himself between Elena and Trent. His posture was rigid, immovable. Rex growled low, the sound vibrating through the icy ground. Devon instinctively took a step back, sweat forming despite the freezing temperatures. Carter swallowed hard, eyes darting between Trent and the towering figure before him. Jim kept his gaze locked on Trent. "It's over," Jim said. "Walk away before you make it worse." Trent's hands balled into fists, but any attempt at bravado melted beneath the weight of Jim's calm, lethal composure. Before the tension could erupt, the wail of a police siren cut through the storm. Sheriff Mitch Boone stepped out of his SUV, snowflakes collecting on the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his thick navy uniform. His weathered face was set in the expression of a man who had finally reached his breaking point. Boone trudged through the snow with a determined stride, one gloved hand carrying a folder, the other resting on his belt. His breath crystallized in the air as he stopped beside Jim and Elena. "Trent Keller," Boone announced, loud enough to be heard over the storm. "You are officially under investigation." Trent spun around, disbelief etched across his features. "Investigation? For what? This is nothing." Boone ignored the outburst and opened the folder. "We have video evidence of you assaulting a disabled resident. We have footage of property damage, harassment, and coercion. We have statements. We have timestamps." Boone stepped closer, towering over Trent despite the younger man's height. "And this time your father's money doesn't erase it." The words hit Trent like a strike. Carter turned white. Devon's mouth fell open. Elena's lips parted in shock, her breath catching. Jim remained silent, watching every flicker of reaction on Trent's face. Trent's outrage erupted. "My father will bury you," he shouted, pointing at Boone with a shaking finger. "And you—" he jabbed the air toward Elena. "You're dead. You hear me? You—" His words collapsed into silence as Boone lifted a hand. "Enough," Boone snapped. "Another threat, and you'll be charged with intimidation on top of everything else." Trent's chest heaved, his blonde hair whipping in the wind. Fury radiated off him, but his power, his shield of privilege, cracked visibly. For the first time, maybe in his whole life, Trent Keller looked small. Carter and Devon stepped away from him, no longer willing to burn with him. Boone handed Trent an official notice. "You'll be summoned for a formal court hearing. Until then, stay away from Elena Parker. Stay away from Jim Walker. Stay away from anyone involved. Any violation and we arrest you on the spot." Trent snatched the papers, his hand trembling with cold and humiliation. The storm swirled around them, but the true cold came from the reality settling over him. There was no easy escape this time. He glared at Jim, spitting venom. "This isn't over." Jim stepped closer, staring straight into Trent's fury. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." With no victory left to claim, Trent shoved past Carter and Devon, storming toward his SUV. The vehicle fishtailed slightly as it sped off, swallowed by the white storm. Carter and Devon hesitated, shame etched across their features, before following behind him. Silence fell over the hospital entrance except for the howl of the wind. Boone exhaled heavily, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. You're safe for now, he told Elena, offering her a small, tired smile. Elena nodded, her eyes shimmering with relief and gratitude. Jim rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. Even Rex nudged her hand, tail slow and steady. Boone turned to Jim. You did the right thing bringing me that evidence, he said, and you were right. He was going to escalate. Jim nodded. It's what people like him do. Boone sighed. I'll be watching him. And if he violates anything at all, I'll make sure the law finally sticks. Jim's gaze drifted to Elena, whose face softened as the reality settled in. She had stood up to Trent today. Truly stood. As the wind roared and clouds shifted, a faint glow of pale sunlight peeked through, almost symbolic. Something had shifted permanently. Elena inhaled deeply, letting the cold air fill her lungs, cleansing and sharp. Thank you, she whispered. To Boone, to Jim, to Rex, to herself. She had taken a stand that might have changed her life. Jim walked beside her as she turned back toward the entrance, his hand steady on the wheelchair handle. Rex trotted faithfully beside them. The storm still raged, but for the first time, Elena didn't feel afraid of it. She didn't feel alone. And in a small Alaskan town, where power once seemed untouchable, justice had finally begun to crack through the ice. Elena Parker woke to a rare, quiet morning. The blizzard had softened overnight, leaving Copper Ridge blanketed in untouched snow that sparkled like crushed diamonds under the pale Alaskan sun. From her apartment window, she watched small groups of townspeople clearing their walkways, chatting, moving with a kind of cautious relief. Like a storm had passed over more than just the sky. Elena brushed a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, the soft morning light illuminating the gentle lines of her face. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the weight of fear pressing on her chest. It was as if the cold inside her had cracked, just enough for warmth to seep through. At the Copper Ridge Courthouse, a small wooden building with a green metal roof, Trent Keller stood before the judge, looking nothing like the untouchable heir he once portrayed. His blonde hair was unstyled, his parka unzipped and dusted with snow. The blue in his eyes had dulled, replaced by disbelief and simmering humiliation. The courtroom was filled with townspeople who had watched him swagger through the streets all his life. Now they watched with long, suppressed resentment. Judge Rowan Pierce, a woman in her late 50s with short silver hair and a stern, weathered face, read through the charges with a steady voice. Harassment, destruction of property, coercion, endangerment. Each word landed like a gavel strike. Trent clenched his jaw, hands trembling at his sides. His father sat rigid on the bench behind him, expression carved from stone. Jim Walker stepped into the back of the courtroom with Rex walking at heel. Jim wore his military cold-weather parka, the high collar brushing his rugged jawline, his gray eyes watching every detail with the same calm alertness he had maintained through war zones. Rex's black and tan coat looked almost golden under the courtroom lights as he sat beside Jim, head high, ears alert. When Elena arrived moments later, wheeling herself into the aisle wearing a soft blue sweater beneath her brown winter coat, all eyes turned to her. She looked small but unbroken, her dark eyes steady, her posture assured. Jim nodded to her, and she smiled back, the quiet confidence in her expression stronger than any words she could have spoken. Judge Pierce issued the final ruling with a tone that allowed no argument. Trent Keller was sentenced to 90 days of community service under direct supervision, weekly behavioral evaluations, and a mandatory appearance before a restorative justice panel composed of town residents, including Elena, if she chose to participate. Privilege, the judge said, her gaze never leaving Trent. does not erase responsibility. A murmur spread across the room. Carter Hale bowed his head, ashamed. Devin Moss shifted uneasily, looking smaller than ever. Trent's face flushed red with fury, yet beneath it all was something new. Something like fear. The world was no longer bending around him. Outside the courthouse, Elena waited beneath the overhang as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky. Jim approached her slowly, footsteps crunching across the cleared walkway. "You did well in there," he said, voice low and warm. Elena looked up at him, her dark lashes dusted with melting snow. "I wasn't sure I could walk into that room," she admitted. "But I kept thinking, if I don't face him now, I never will." Jim nodded, understanding her fear more deeply than she knew. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the hard thing anyway. Elena smiled softly, her breath fogging in the cold. "You sound like someone who's learned that the hard way." Jim's lips curved into a rare smile. "More than once." As they walked toward the street, Tom Vickers jogged over from the garage across the road. His blonde hair stuck out beneath his beanie, cheeks red from the cold. "Elena! Jim!" he called out. He held a small, hand-painted wooden sign. I made this for your ramp." The sign read, "You matter." Here in warm brushstrokes, decorated with a tiny mountain skyline. Elena's eyes watered. "Tom, it's beautiful." He rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "Just wanted to, make your place feel safe." Jim clapped him on the shoulder. "You've done more than most." Tom's shy grin brightened. Later that afternoon, Jim and Elena met at the diner, a different atmosphere from the stormy night before. Nora Benson, the red-haired server with kind hazel eyes, moved between tables with her usual energy, but today she paused to pat Elena on the shoulder. "You showed real strength today, sweetheart," Nora said warmly. "Don't let anyone take that from you." Elena's cheeks flushed with pride. Jim sat across from her, Rex lying at his feet. The familiar smell of coffee and fresh cornbread filled the space. The storm outside had weakened into a gentle snowfall. For the first time, the diner felt like a refuge rather than a hiding place. As Elena spoke about future plans, her designs, her wish to submit artwork to a gallery in Anchorage, Jim listened quietly. Her passion lit her eyes, giving her a glow that pushed back the winter cold. He wondered how long she had kept that fire buried under fear. When she paused, she looked at him thoughtfully. "Jim, you came here for peace, right? For quiet?" He nodded. "That was the idea." Elena's voice softened. "I hope helping me didn't take that away." Jim leaned back, the chair creaking under his broad frame. "No," he said quietly. "Peace isn't the absence of trouble. It's knowing you stood on the right side of something." Rex nudged Jim's hand, as if agreeing. Evening settled over Copper Ridge with a violet glow. Jim walked Elena home through streets lined with soft snowbanks, street lamps casting golden halos across the white. Rex trotted beside them, leaving long paw prints in the fresh powder. The quiet was profoundly comforting. No threats lurking in the corners, no anger waiting in the dark. Elena looked around, breathing deeply. "The town feels different," she said. "Lighter." Jim glanced at her. Maybe the town just needed to see someone stand up. She met his eyes. "Not someone, you." Jim looked away, a bit embarrassed. "Elena, you're stronger than you think. You stood up today. I'm just making sure no one knocks you down again." When they reached her apartment, Elena turned to him. The snowflakes caught in her dark hair glimmered like tiny stars. "Jim, are you leaving soon?" she asked hesitantly. Jim expected the question. He had planned to pass through Copper Ridge, maybe stay a week or two, then keep drifting. It had been his life for years, never settling, never belonging. But something inside him had shifted. Maybe it was Elena's courage. Maybe it was the town's awakening. Or maybe it was the realization that the battles worth fighting weren't in faraway war zones, but in the quiet corners where injustice hid beneath routine. "I'm thinking of staying a bit longer," he said finally. "Rex likes it here." Elena's face brightened, though she tried to hide it. That night, Jim stood outside his cabin, watching the mountains disappear into the twilight. The wind brushed snow across the frozen ground, but beneath it, something warmer stirred. Hope, faint but persistent. Rex stood beside him, tail swishing slowly. Jim placed a hand on the dog's sturdy shoulders. "We'll stay a while," he murmured. "This town deserves someone watching." In the distance, a light flickered in Elena's window. Jim let a rare peace settle into his bones. Winter was still here, but even winter had to break eventually. There are winters in life that feel endless, seasons of fear, injustice, silence, and cold that cut deeper than any storm. But God always knows how to place the right people in the right moment. A battle-worn veteran who's walked through darkness, a young woman whose strength outshines the snow around her, a quiet little town waiting for someone to stand up for what's right. And then the miracle arrives, not in thunder or blinding light, but through courage, compassion, and the way God uses ordinary people to lift each other up. Jim protected Elena not just with strength, but with the belief that every soul deserves safety. Elena stood tall against cruelty, proving that God never abandons those with a steady heart. And the people of Copper Ridge learned that silence in the face of wrong only allows darkness to grow. God doesn't always stop the storm immediately, but He always sends someone to hold our hand through it. If this story touched your heart, share it to spread the message that kindness still exists, justice still matters, and God's miracles still happen every single day through the small, quiet acts of love we show one another. Comment "Amen" to ask God to protect you and your family. Like the video to support positive stories. Subscribe for more stories of hope, courage, and faith. May God bless you, bring peace to your home, and shine His light on everyone watching this story.